Over to you, Charles.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mika, and thank you to all my fellow panelists for your fantastic contributions. I'm actually speaking here today, I would say, firstly, as a member of the No Cold War Coordinating Committee, where I have the distinct misfortune of being the only U.S. national actually based in the United States. And that fact is in many ways a testament to the international reach of No Cold War, but it does raise the question, given the global scope of our work, why did we publish a whole briefing and organize a whole event, namely this one, solely dedicated to one country's national election, in a year that has been dubbed the biggest election year in history, with over half the world's population going to the polls? The answer should be clear. This one country alone is responsible for 53% of actual military expenditures worldwide, together with its allies, 75%. And it runs a globe-spanning empire of over 900 overseas military bases. And through this mechanism, it exercises effectively dictatorial one-party rule, masquerading as two-party rule with typical American extravagance, as Julius Nyerere quipped, over the 96% of the world population, which lacks even the illusion of a democratic choice in the matter by virtue of not being US citizens. That leaves about 4% who are US citizens, 3% who are eligible to vote for president of the United States, 2% or so who actually do vote, and in reality, as few as 0.03% of that 2% whose votes actually matter in the outcome, thanks to our horrendously antiquated electoral college system. Now, for non-US listeners who might not be familiar with all the gory details of how this works, it's a system where each state in the United States is assigned a certain number of electoral votes and allocates all of them to whichever presidential candidate wins the most popular votes in that state. And it's the outcome of the electoral vote that matters, not the popular vote. So you might ask why this system treats individual states as unitary blocks and not the country as a whole when it is an election for president of the United States. There's a number of sordid historical reasons for this that date back to the founding of the United States, and this is actually pretty important to highlight. Number one is that at the time of founding, each state could basically restrict voting rights arbitrarily based on race, gender, property ownership, and this kind of differentiation rendered the idea of a national popular vote meaningless. Number two is that new states could only be added to the US once white settlers had killed or expelled enough indigenous people to secure an overwhelming democratic majority in that territory. Number three is that until the Civil War, new states were only added to the country if their addition could guarantee the survival and expansion of the institution of slavery. So this is all to say that the continued survival of, this monstrosity, the Electoral College, is in many ways a constant reminder that the United States was and still is a genocidal settler colony whose continental and then global expansion made it the core of the hyper-imperialist world system and the primary sponsor, of course, of today's settler colonial Zionist genocide in Gaza and Lebanon. And for that reason, I find it tremendously ironic that this same electoral college in the recent 2024 election, by narrowing the national presidential contest to a handful of so-called swing states where the outcome was in doubt, in other words, a tiny minority of a tiny minority of a tiny minority of the world population, somehow put the spotlight on the one place in this country in which the global anti-genocide majority could speak most legibly. And I'm speaking here of the state of Michigan, which is home to the highest proportion of Arab Americans in the country, and to its first Arab majority city, Dearborn, which resoundingly punished the Democrats for their hand in this genocide by slashing their 2020 vote total in half and giving 18% of their votes to Jill Stein. Nationally, the figures among Muslim voters are even more stark. And here I'm going to quickly share this chart that I pulled up last night based on exit polling from the Council on American Islamic Relations. This shows the party preference of Muslim voters in different elections from 2000 to 2024. And as you can see, from 2020 to 2024, we had the largest swing of any since basically the swing from 2000 to 2004 against George Bush because of the war on terror and the invasion of Iraq. And indeed, this was a swing to the Green Party, right? 53% for Jill Stein, and then only 21% for Trump, and a stunning 20% for Kamala Harris. So probably the largest swing ever to a third party from the two main parties among any demographic ever in US history. And I would say that within the confines of the US electoral system, this historic repudiation of this genocidal imperialist duopoly is the closest that any voting bloc could get to aligning with the overwhelming global majority, a majority that has manifested in repeated 14-1 votes at the UN Security Council demanding a ceasefire in Gaza, and 124-14 vote at the General Assembly demanding an end to the Israeli occupation, and in the millions upon millions of ordinary people who have resisted by occupying their campuses, blockading circulation, sabotaging weapons facilities, or indeed on the ground engaging in armed struggle. And this point brings me to the other capacity in which I'm speaking, which, as Mika mentioned, is as a member of 𝐤𝐴O Collective, which brings together anti-imperialists in the Chinese diaspora, predominantly in the US and Canada, in order to challenge US-led aggression against China. And here our analysis, which we share with No Cold War at large, is that the United States has escalated its drive to war against China without interruption between the Trump and Biden presidencies, and will continue to do so into Trump's second term. And moreover, that this new Cold War on China is inseparable from the global machinations of US imperialism, which envisions both Israel and Taiwan explicitly as so-called unsinkable aircraft carriers at opposite ends of Asia. Indeed, the bipartisan congressional majority in favor of arms sales to Taiwan was even larger than the majority for arms sales to Israel in this past April's votes on the National Security Supplemental Package. And likewise, when it comes to domestic repression of anti-imperialist forces, we see that the accusations of anti-Semitism and material support for terrorism lodged against the Palestine Solidarity Movement are merging more and more seamlessly with those of allegiance to, as they put it, communist China. Indeed, these accusations often issue from the same regime mouthpieces, most notably incoming Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and are directed at the same targets. As such, we at 𝐤𝐴O Collective have a clear message for our own diaspora community, which is that we must realize, as so many of our Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim compatriots have, that we are not a small embattled minority in this country to be scapegoated for its pathologies. Let them question our so-called loyalty to the empire, because we owe it no loyalty. Our only loyalty is to humanity and to our respective homelands' ongoing struggles for sovereignty, self-determination, and liberation from imperialism. And far from a minority, at a global level, we belong to that overwhelming majority that once went by the name of third world peoples, and which today proudly wears the label bestowed upon it by the Palestinian resistance, the free people of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles.